Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Dr. Anna George. Dr. George is the Vice President of Conservation Science and Education at the Tennessee Aquarium. Her job allows her to continue to pursue a love for marine biology and education. Dr. George, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we find out why your go-to karaoke song is Friends in Low Places, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Well, typically some sort of chai tea. So I am not quite the coffee drinker. It gets me a little too jittery for the day, and I talk fast enough as it is. So I try to stay with the caffeine level of tea.
How long you been doing tea?
My whole life.
Yeah.
I never did coffee. Even in college, pulled an all-nighter, and it was not coffee for me the next day. I'm a lot. I'm a lot. So if I add that much caffeine, it's too much.
Well, I think I told you earlier, I'm a decaf guy. I had to pare back on it.
See, you understand.
I do. It can get to you. I should have had some tea for you this morning.
That's quite all right. I've already had some tea, so I am ready to go.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, and I appreciate you actually coming into the studio to record this with us. I'm a big fan of the Tennessee Aquarium. We moved here in the late 1999, 2000, when my girls were, how old were they? 7 and 5.
Oh, perfect.
And it was perfect.
Perfect ages.
Family membership. Hey, what do you guys want to do this weekend? Let's go down to the aquarium. Let's hang out.
Makes it easy, doesn't it? You don't have to think.
It's the most perfect thing. It really is. And this isn't a commercial, but I'll give you a commercial. If you don't buy a family membership to the aquarium and you got young kids, you're just dumb.
You're missing the best deal in town, I think.
Yeah.
And it supports so much, too. It's not just about the access. It's about being part of all that the Tennessee Aquarium is, all of our conservation work, all of our education work, excellence in animal care. So it really is a great deal. It's a nonprofit, and it's also a fantastic way to entertain your kids, particularly in the winter when it's freezing outside.
Oh, yeah. As we're talking where it's 11 degrees this morning. Yeah. Yeah, the other thing, and I want to get to your story, but the other thing about the aquarium is a lot of people we talk to, one of the questions I tend to ask is, Chattanooga's had a lot of success over the last 20, 30 years. What do you think was the key or the linchpin to that? And the number of people that say, if it wasn't for the Tennessee Aquarium, I don't know where we'd be.
Well, it's the vision. It's the vision of the river that connects us, the vision of the community that comes together. And for me, that's the community above and below the water. So all the incredible fish swimming around outside, and just the fact that we're here celebrating and protecting them. So I love that answer. I'm here in Chattanooga because of the aquarium. So I moved here for the job almost 20 years ago.
You're almost a native at that point.
Yeah, it feels like it. It's longer than I've lived anywhere in my life, so I will say that.
So you were born and grew up to what age in Houston? Which I don't think a lot of people equate with marine biology, except the fact they're a port city. That I don't think that registers with a lot of people.
I know. Well, if you live in Houston, you would know how close you are to the Gulf because the humid air reminds you every single day. So yes, I was born in Houston, lived there for the first 7 years of my life, and I still have, my dad, my stepmom, my aunt are still down there to this day. So I've had a lot of trips to Houston all throughout my life.
Now, I know young kids, and particularly young girls, get infatuated with animals about 5, 6 years old, because both of mine did that. So what happened?
I think mine was earlier.
Yeah.
I remember demanding a cat. I got my first cat when I was 4, and that was because I had pressured my parents for the prior 4 years. So always animals. I don't know why. It's just they were there. I connected to them. We used to travel a lot, and every time we went to another city, another country even, I was demanding that we go see the zoo. So, I had my 7th birthday party at the Houston Zoo. I hope one day they put a plaque up for me. I've told them that. They laughed in my face. I don't know why.
I bet it's going to come. I grew up in Memphis, and we happened to have a really good zoo, and always enjoyed going to the Memphis Zoo.
Zoos and aquariums are just those places where families make memories. And I think that's part of the importance of zoos and aquariums in our lives to this day, is that it's intergenerational learning, but it's also memory making and meaning making for families.
Now, you mentioned your first love was with cats. So how'd you switch to marine biology? Particularly, they seem to be at odds with each other.
I know, right? Well, if cats got to have a food source, right? We got to protect that food source. My grandfather was a fisherman. He had a boat that he would take out on the Gulf, and I would go out on that boat with him. And I remember him asking me to call the fishes in so he could catch them. I am not an angler. I have no enjoyment of fishing myself in the traditional methods. I like fishing for research, where I can kind of guarantee I'm going to catch what I want to catch. But hook and line, I couldn't think of anything more boring, much to my husband's dismay, because he's an avid fly fisherman.
But see, that's the beauty of fishing, is you don't have to catch anything. You can just be out on the water.
Yeah, I'd really rather sit on the water and read a book and know that I've accomplished something. I don't know.
So it wasn't those early days on the water with your grandfather making those memories?
That certainly contributed, absolutely contributed. I know it was also the feeling of just wondering what was happening underneath. All this water that you can't see what's going on under there. That is something that I definitely was just curious about. So I did my first, you mentioned Houston's not known as a, marine city. My first summer camp was actually in Galveston, Texas at Texas A&M. I went there in 7th and 8th grade and did a week-long summer camp in marine biology at Texas A&M Galveston. So yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of great marine life, marine studies that can be done in the Houston area.
Oh yeah, all through the coast there. It's like it's a whole other world underneath the water, huh?
Oh, completely. Completely.
So you mentioned you lived in Houston till you were 7. Was that when you moved to Blacksburg?
No, there's some stops. I gave you a very shortened biography. I'm going to do them quickly so you can understand why I don't type them all out normally. So Houston, Denver, Colorado, Bogota, Colombia in South America, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, then Blacksburg, Virginia, where I graduated from high school, finally.
Okay, Houston, then Denver.
Houston, then Denver.
Big marine biology town, Denver.
Oh, yeah, you know it. Oh, Denver's beautiful. Love the Rockies. I mean, just an incredible place to be.
And if you can, just tell me what ages.
Okay, so Houston till age 7, Denver 7 to 9. I lived in Colombia for a year from 9 to 10.
Okay, let's stop at Colombia. How do you get to Bogota, Colombia, besides an airplane?
Well, when your dad works in oil.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's the unifying theme of these first couple of moves. Houston, as everyone knows, is an oil town. So my dad was a geologist for Exxon at the time. So basically, a petroleum geologist tells you where you're most likely to find oil if you dig, and that's what he did. So that was Houston, Denver, and Bogota, Colombia. There's a lot of oil in Colombia and Venezuela.
Venezuela. I didn't realize Colombia.
Yep.
And then you end up in Tuscaloosa.
I know, right? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
So at that point, my parents actually divorced. My mom was not so fond of South America, and my dad really was.
Yeah.
So dad stayed in Colombia and Venezuela. My mom started her Master's of Library Science and then her PhD at the University of Alabama.
Well, that explains it.
Right. There's not that many library schools in the U.S., and so that was one that was very welcoming to her. The South, we're known for our hospitality. She had family in Alabama. My mother's mother was born in Alabama, so it made a little more sense than it looks on the paper. But yeah, the move from Colombia to Alabama was a little unusual.
I bet it was. How long were you in Tuscaloosa?
We were in Tuscaloosa 4.5 years. I'm now trying to do the math in my head of how old I was. I was 10 when we arrived. I think I was 14 when we moved to Blacksburg.
You moved to Blacksburg and went to high school?
Went to high school in Blacksburg, stayed there till I graduated high school.
So was your interest consistent with particularly marine biology?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I loved all animals, but I particularly loved fish. And Alabama, we went down to Dauphin Island Marine Lab.
Oh, yeah?
You know that one. We were there for a field trip. That's when it really started ramping up. Went back to visit my grandma in Houston and spent those 2 summers at Galveston. And then when we moved from Alabama to Virginia, I played a really good trick on my mom. I told her I was bored. And that she had just uprooted me in the middle of high school. I had no friends. This was a horrible thing to do.
That's a hard time to move.
It was interesting. It was kind of a lie. I loved Virginia. I made very fast friends, but I convinced my mom I hadn't, and the summer was going to be awful. And so she threw this book of summer camps at me, and she said, fine, find something and get out of here. So I'm sure she was expecting, like North Carolina. I don't know. I found a camp where they took you to the Cayman Islands for a month and taught you how to scuba dive. and you studied marine biology with college professors. And I somehow convinced her that that was what she absolutely needed to do for my mental health.
You were a pretty smart kid too.
I was.
I mean, Cayman Islands.
Yeah. I was very smart. To my mom's credit, she still laughs to this day about that trick of mine, but she says it absolutely paid off. I mean, from that point on, I never looked back.
So, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. A lot of people we talk to aren't doing what either they went to school for or what it never entered their mind they would end up where they are. You seem to be on a pretty straight path.
Yeah, the good news about me is that I knew what I wanted to do, and I was pretty determined to do it. There was no wavering. Once I realized biology was a career, that I could actually, earn a living watching fish.
Yeah.
I mean, that was score. That was good.
Was it those camps that really opened your eyes to it?
I say that a lot to people. They talk about, well, what degrees do you need? And I'm like, honestly, the degrees matter. Don't get me wrong. But what really set me up for success was actually doing all the things I did out of school. So any sort of summer learning opportunity I had, I was taking it. Any sort of chance to work in a lab, to get to research alongside other, far more advanced researchers. Those are the things in the sciences that really set you up for success.
And you mentioned the Dauphin Island. So you went to that before you were even in high school.
Yeah, that was middle school. Middle school for a field trip to Dauphin Island with my 7th grade science class. Just an age that everyone loves reminiscing about normally, right?
Yeah.
Middle school. But then it was called Sea Camp at Texas A&M Galveston, and that was 2 summers after 7th and 8th grade.
And what goes on at Sea Camp?
Oh, it was amazing. We would take the research vessels out. We would trawl for fish. They'd pull them up. We'd identify them. We were eating, oysters on those research vessels because they trawled up oysters, and they were like, here you go, have a bite. We did fish dissections. I'm trying to remember everything. It was college faculty who were teaching middle schoolers. So it was basically like taking an undergraduate course in ichthyology as a middle school student.
Any of those other kids in the camp with you pursue
I didn't
yours?
stay in touch with the 7th and 8th graders. I did stay in touch with my Cayman Island friends, and they absolutely pursued some of the same degrees. And I even ran into one of my former professors from the Cayman Islands camp when she was working at Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. So
you got a little network going.
The network matters. No matter what your degree is, your network is always important.
Yeah. So you're in Blacksburg, which Virginia Tech's beautiful school.
It is, but I went to UVA, so I don't know that we can wax poetic on Virginia Tech too much.
Well, the campus is beautiful.
The campus is beautiful. My mom worked there, so I was like, no, there's no way I'm going to go to school at Virginia Tech. It's beautiful, but come on, let's wax poetic on UVA.
Yeah,
it's
UVA is a beautiful
It's
campus,
gorgeous,
too. I mean,
yeah.
And it's got all the tradition and the history. How far is it from Blacksburg?
It's about 2.5 hours.
And you go to UVA for your marine biology degree, shockingly.
Well, that was just biology, actually.
That was just biology.
Yeah,
okay.
so Virginia is a coastal school, but UVA does not have a marine biology program. But it was in-state tuition, which is awfully nice.
Yeah, particularly where Virginia is priced nowadays.
I don't even look at them anymore because I have a 6-year-old and I just kind of weep when I try to project what I'll be paying. But yeah, I went to UVA for biology, which is actually the best. It's how I ended up in Chattanooga because it started making me look at what was happening in rivers and streams. So trying to turn me a little more into an aquatic biologist, which is what we call freshwater biology, as opposed to strictly marine and coastal.
See, I learned something.
I know, right?
Aquatic biologist.
I know. I just slipped that in there, and you actually caught it.
I'm good like that.
Yeah. So aquatic, it can cover marine or freshwater, but really it's used more to convey freshwater biology and rivers and streams and all the beautiful habitat we have in these inland states that we have.
So as you're growing up in high school and even into college and you've gone to these camps, what else are you doing to pursue aquatic biology, marine biology? What kind of part-time jobs you taking? And
see, that's the trick of it. Then I started working part-time more with children. So you're seeing my dual interest right here, animals and education. So I think I started babysitting at the age of 11 or 12. Which
that's pretty young.
I know it terrifies me when I say it these days as a parent. I'm like, who the heck trusted me with their kids?
Yeah.
But they did, and I made a whopping $2 an hour, which was amazing in
That's good money.
Tuscaloosa in the 80s and 90s. So I started babysitting. That transitioned to more and more just kind of steady families that I would be almost like a part-time nanny, that I'm just showing up at the same family houses after school, greeting the kids, all of that. What else? I started tutoring, and I started my first paid job, like with a W-2 and all that, was actually in the music department of UVA. I was handing out keys to practice rooms for music students, which, you work from 6 until midnight and you're handing out keys and basically you're studying. And
You're getting paid to study.
You're getting paid to study. It was a fantastic job because
That's
you
a pretty
had to
good deal.
study, right? Like it forced you to just sit there and study because you didn't have friends interrupting you. They were musicians. They were trying to practice. So it was a great deal.
And then you heard some great music and some bad music, I bet.
Mostly great. I mean, these are college students. They were fantastic. So it was a neat job.
Is that where your love for Friends in Low Places came from? I guess that was
No, that's definitely not UVA. UVA would not claim that one. That's
a little more
that's
Alabama.
Tuscaloosa. Yeah, that's Tuscaloosa. It's just a great karaoke song.
Oh, it is.
And the key to that song is you can get the whole room singing with you, so you're not carrying the load alone.
Well, I'm a University of Tennessee grad, and up until this year, when the song that they play at the end of the third quarter to the fourth quarter at Tennessee was Friends in Low Places.
I didn't know that.
And there's nothing like 106,000 people singing that song.
Well, I mean, UT fans, you are friends in low places.
Yeah,
I gotta say, that's a very accurate song.
Oh, it is. We felt
know.
right at home with it.
I'm a diehard Bama fan. I'm so sorry. Tuscaloosa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When I know, right? But I was there one of the years we got a national championship, and they gave us a day off of school for the championship parade in city schools. So you
had to like that.
You can buy lifelong loyalty by giving a middle school student a day off of school. Like that's all it took.
Well, since you're an Alabama fan, I got to tell my Alabama joke. You know what Auburn's an acronym for?
What?
Alabama usually beats us around November.
I like that one.
Do you know what UT is?
Uh-oh, what?
Us too.
Not the past couple of years. It's been terrible.
Oh, I thought it's been pretty good, but I digress. So, what did those jobs teach you? What kind of discipline did that give you as you wanted to pursue aquatic biology?
Well, for those jobs, that's just the discipline of making sure you show up to work each day, right? Mm-hmm. But for me, that was a lot about classroom management, about leadership in the education space. And so a lot of that is really learning about children and what they're looking for and what helps them learn, what motivates kids. I joke that kids are alien life forms. They are just not, they're not quite humans yet. We're trying to get them there. And I love them, but they're very different. They are inspired by different things. They're motivated by different things. So all that time working with kids was really preparation for the education side of my job at the aquarium.
Did you ever think of becoming a teacher?
Absolutely. I did become a teacher briefly. So I taught college briefly after I finished my PhD. A classroom teacher, more elementary or middle or high school. I did a lot of work where I would show up as outreach for those types of environments. But I quickly learned that while I adore teaching, I cannot stand grading. And so for me, it was an easy jump from a classroom environment to the aquarium because I get to teach all day long and I never, ever, ever have to grade a single assignment. It's fantastic.
Everyone passes.
Everyone passes. And that's part of what motivates the kids, though, is they know that they are here, in a learning environment where they get to explore what they are curious and interested in. And they don't have to worry about what's going to be on the test at the end of the day. So they are learning without fear. And I think that's what makes it such a compelling environment for them.
So you graduate from Virginia with your biology degree. Are you going out and saying, okay, now I'm going to go find a job? Or do you have the realization that, you know what, I'm going to need more education if I'm going to pursue what I'm going to pursue?
Yeah, I definitely knew I needed more education. I should also say education is kind of a family job for us. So my mom, my dad, my brother, and I all have PhDs. We have generations of academics before my dad. So kind of just getting your bachelor's was insufficient for standing in my family. I'll put it that way. If you want bragging rights at Thanksgiving, a bachelor's degree is not going to cut it. So I was immediately looking for graduate schools during my senior year of college. I applied to several, both marine and freshwater programs, but then at the end of the day realized that what I really cared about was freshwater, the rivers and streams right in our backyard. They're so overlooked by so many people. There's so much emphasis on the ocean, and yet we're not paying attention to all the things that are flowing past us and delivering pollution to the ocean. So for me, it was an easy switch to say, hey, let's go. In all things but football, I am for the underdog. Now, in football, I like my Bama. But in everything else, I really was excited about the chance to bring awareness to something that most people weren't paying attention to, and that's the fish that live in rivers and streams.
So where did that take you after Virginia?
Oh, well, you're going to love this. It took me right back to Alabama. So I started my PhD at the University of Alabama with a National Science Foundation fellowship that I had earned there. Unfortunately, after only 1 year, my advisor took a new job in St. Louis University. And in the sciences, you tend to follow your specific advisor. You don't stay at a program, you follow your advisor who's guiding your research. So after just 1 year in Tuscaloosa, I moved up to St. Louis University and spent the next 4 years finishing my PhD up there with Dr. Maiden, Rick Maiden, who is my advisor at St. Louis University.
That's kind of the way college football works today. You follow the coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So. And you mentioned you started at University of Alabama, and I know people realize Alabama's on the coast, but you don't associate really the University of Alabama.
Man, it's such a great state. So Alabama and Tennessee, these are the two states that have more species of freshwater fish than anywhere else in the United States.
I didn't know that.
I know. A lot of people don't. And so there's more species of fish in our rivers and streams, either in Tennessee or Alabama. I'm being vague because it actually depends on where the current state of science is. Sometimes a new species gets described out of Alabama, sometimes Tennessee. They flip-flop back and forth. For the sake of unity in the SEC, which we don't have very often, I decide just to lump them together and give us all credit for it. But
and I don't, because of the rivers in Tennessee and Alabama, that's why we got the sparkling white beaches in the Gulf Coast.
I mean, it certainly helps. So we've got, here in Tennessee, we're known for the Cumberland River system, the Tennessee River system. We've got tributaries directly to the Mississippi over in West Tennessee. I'm sure you've heard of the Hatchie before if you're from Memphis.
I grew up in Memphis.
There you go. And then in Alabama, you add in the Mobile Bay drainage, the Mobile Basin. And so you've got the Coosa and the Tallapoosa and the Black Warrior River. And so just these incredible rivers that have a whole lot of life in them. So whether it's fish or mussels or crayfish, turtles, salamanders, all of that. There's incredible amount of species living in the rivers and streams in the southeastern United States.
I had read somewhere that the Chattanooga area is probably the most diverse in terms of...
Absolutely. We call it the geographic center of freshwater diversity for North America. So if you look at this region, and Chattanooga's right in the heart of it, incredible amounts of biodiversity that live right here in our backyard.
And I want to get to the aquarium to make a point about that. But before I get there, you're getting your PhD at St. Louis University. And what do you have to do at that point? What are you doing while you're getting your PhD? Are you pursuing things along with that?
So a PhD in the sciences is pretty rigorous, right? For your PhD, you're doing coursework, but that's the easy part. The hard part is you're trying to embark upon your own line of research and develop a research project that is your dissertation. And a lot of people think like, okay, you do your coursework, you take your written and oral exams, and then you start doing the research. And no. You're doing it all throughout. Like if you haven't started that research project the moment you enter grad school, you're already behind.
Really?
Yeah, it's a lot to take on.
And how long is typically grad school? 3 years?
Well, master's programs would be 2 to 3 years. A PhD is going to be anywhere from 4 years if you already have a master's, all the way up to 6 or 7 if you don't. I was done in 5. I was bound and determined to get out of there and start actually earning money. But throughout all of that, I'm doing research projects. You're writing grants, trying to find funding to pay for the research you want to do. And then on top of all of that, because I wasn't doing enough, I decided I would also get a job. So I started working at the St. Louis Zoo during that time period, leading overnight programs and summer camps. And so overnights, we do the same thing at the aquarium. They're fantastic. It's like night at the museum.
Yeah.
A group of scouts or a classroom or even family programs in the summer, they're coming in order to spend the night at the zoo. So I would arrive at work at 5 p.m., typically on a Friday or Saturday night. We would do craft, movie, game of some sort, activity, live animal program. We'd go on a night hike around the zoo. We would then roll out sleeping bags in the exhibits. You'd get sort of sleep. I don't really want to call it sleep. It was not restful. So you would sort of sleep. And then the next morning, you'd clean everything up, you'd go on a morning hike, and then the kids would leave right as the zoo was opening, right around 9 a.m.
How old were the kids?
They were, largely upper elementary, sometimes middle school, but I would say 4th, 5th through about 7th grade is really the age group that connects most with.
So going for your PhD is a lot of work, number one.
Right.
You've got your coursework.
Yep.
Are you teaching on the side?
Yes, I am a TA. You're right. So I'm a teaching assistant for labs.
And you're trying to start your dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take this job at the St. Louis Zoo.
Then I take this job at the St. Louis Zoo. And all of this without coffee. I really do want to point that out. Yeah, all of this with tea, fueled by tea.
Well, tea has more caffeine than coffee.
If you drink enough, it sure does.
So when did you have time for a life?
Yeah, you don't. No.
Yeah. Seriously, though, are you that driven that you, because you said you wanted to get out and start earning money. Was that the drive, or was it just?
I mean, the guy I married, I was dating at this time period, and he was also a biologist. So the life was just that we both liked fish and talked about fish all day long. So yeah, that is my life.
Do you still talk about fish?
We do still talk about fish. It's appalling to most people. They're like, seriously, how many scientific names do you use in the course of a normal conversation? The answer is a lot.
So you finally get out and get your PhD. What's next?
Finally get out and get my PhD. I do what's next is you apply for a lot of jobs. What I love about this conversation is we're glossing over all of the applications that have been put in. And that's
we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's one thing I like to remind anyone I mentor, which is like, you just see all the times that I got told yes. You don't see all the times that I got told no.
That's a great point.
And so there were tons of applications to undergrad where I got told no. There were tons of applications to grad school where I got told no. There were tons of emails where I got told no before you even applied. That's the best part about grad school is you're just emailing people that you would like to be your advisor. And they'll tell you no straight up. You don't even have to put the work into an application. That's phenomenal. I love it. Yeah, like it sounds weird to people, but I would far rather you reject me off of an email than I have to write a cover letter and send, the $50 application fee. So
all that time you're having to network.
Oh, and you're going to scientific conferences. You're presenting your research results so that people see what you are working on. You are emailing others, asking for help in the field. Could you send me fish tissues so I could sequence the DNA? All of that is actually building up your network so that you're seen as an active researcher in the field.
And that was never the realization to me. If you could talk a little bit more about the rejection of all this. Because as we were talking earlier about kind of the purpose of this podcast, you've got a lot of 20 and 30-year-olds who may be in a similar situation, not sure what they want to do, but seeing friends succeed, and all of a sudden you're getting a bunch of no's. And I'm going to assume something. You're probably, as a kid, pretty successful, serious student, not used to no.
Yeah, my mom even told me yes to a month in the Caymans.
Well, I
get told yes a lot. Yeah, we have a joke. I remember one of my lab mates telling me at one time, he was like, yeah, when I advise someone on, do you want to go get a PhD? I ask them, do you like failure? Like, does failure energize you? Do you enjoy it when someone tells you no? Does that fire you up to do more of it? Because if so, great, come on in. But if failure is demotivating to you, if it makes you sad or depressed, like, yeah, PhD in biology is probably not for you. And we laughed about that, but it's true. You are really trying to develop a sense of confidence. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, in those early days, it's bravado more than confidence, that you're just trying to show that you are smart enough and determined enough and that you will do it. 20 years down the line, it looks great and easy and amazing that I am where I am. But there's certainly no guarantee of any of that when you are actually in graduate school and in the early days of your career. You
really had a big dose of learning to be a salesperson.
Oh, don't say that. That's like, man, that's not a good career. That's not a good career to mention to biologists. We're like, no, we're not marketing and sales. But yeah, we absolutely are.
And that's what I mean by that, because you have to learn how to take no. In sales, I always teach you, a no just means you either haven't answered the questions yet, or if you go get another no, but if you get 10 no's, you're going to get a yes. I mean, it's a numbers game at that. So I would imagine all those applications, you can get those back and be depressed about it, or you can say, okay, I just move on to the next one, and that yes is coming.
And ideally, in the sciences, you're learning something from it. I always harken back to work in research where we joke about it's the exciting data that gets published, right? It's the exciting data that gets the news, but negative data is just as important if you know how to correctly interpret it. So your no can be negative data that lets you try to figure out what was it? Was this not the right culture? Was this not the right environment? For me, a lot of the no's were, I really don't need to be in formal education. I don't fit in great at most colleges and universities because I hate grading, and I was kind of open about that, which is, not the best way to get a job. So
I'll take this job, but I don't want to grade anything.
Yeah, that's not a great way to get hired, right?
Yeah.
They don't really look for that.
Well, it sounds like it really forced you to focus on what you really wanted.
It forced me to focus on what I wanted. It forced me to lean into skill sets I was already good at and to develop those further. So through the St. Louis Zoo job, I learned that I was quite good at talking about science to non-scientists, and I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy using jargon to scientists. It felt like it was just trying to prove how smart you were.
Sounds like the corporate world.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Jargon's the worst. But what I loved was taking people who maybe they had a childhood passion for biology, but then got convinced they weren't smart enough or they weren't good enough to do it, but they still had some interest in it. And those are the people I love to talk to, are the people who say, oh, I'm not really smart, but, and then they rattle off this question that a biologist may not have even thought of because it's kind of unorthodox or it's down a different road. And those are the moments that I absolutely adore, is someone who thinks they don't understand science, but they actually do.
Yeah.
And getting to take them to the next step. And so that was really the key to me, that I belonged in the informal world where, at a university, I might be teaching 100, 200 college students a year. At the aquarium, we're teaching 750,000 visitors a year. And so to me, that was a huge difference in impact and why I wanted to be in the informal world so badly.
You get your PhD. Where do you go from there?
So I get my PhD. Back to the rejections. I get about 30 rejections to jobs, but I get one yes, and that is Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It is a small liberal arts school, great little school, and they were looking for someone who would be a sabbatical replacement. So you probably know in universities and colleges, every 6 to 8 years or so, faculty members get a sabbatical where they take either a semester or a full year off, and they go study and think and develop new research ideas. And so I was filling in for someone who was on sabbatical, and I was teaching courses, and gave me a really good glimpse into what it would be like being at a liberal arts college. Because at that point, I joke some, but I didn't know if I wanted to actually be a faculty member at a smaller school. I liked those environments. You got to know your students pretty well. It wasn't an anonymous, huge campus. It was actually one where you can mentor students throughout their career. And I thought, well, this might be what I want to do. So I did try that out for a year. But in the midst of that very first year there, my position, as it was then, came open at the Tennessee Aquarium. I had always loved the Tennessee Aquarium and what I could say we do. At the time, it was what they did for freshwater, for the Southeast, for really showcasing this incredible diversity. And given my background from the Southeast as well as at St. Louis Zoo and knowing what informal science educations can do, I leapt on the chance to apply for that job.
It wasn't the fact that you were going to have to grade papers.
Well, I mean, that was part of it.
Yeah.
But I knew by then I shouldn't be talking about that in interviews. So, yeah.
How did the Tennessee Aquarium, or when did the Tennessee Aquarium get on your radar as you were studying?
1993, the year after we opened.
Yeah.
So I was still in Tuscaloosa at that point, and my mom and I took a long weekend trip from Tuscaloosa up to Chattanooga. We had an ancestor who died at Chickamauga back in the 1860s. So we knew that we had kin that were in this area. She was like, let's go see Chattanooga. So we just road tripped up here. She has a picture of me as a, awkward middle schooler sitting in front of the Tennessee Aquarium when we first opened.
What was your first impression when you walked in?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it then. We also used to bring our Alabama undergrads. When I was there for that year, we would take our undergrads up to the aquarium for one of our field trips. Really, the thing that stood out to me all of those times were the first exhibits under the peaks. So the Cove Forest and the Delta, just how well replicated nature was inside. You could not tell that you weren't standing in the Smokies. And that was a really incredible experience to me as a child. And then also on labs was just seeing The Tennessee Aquarium is here. They are really showcasing what's happening in the Southeast. And no one was doing that at the time. No one was talking about the back. It was all focused on rainforests and coral reefs, and these are great environments. I lived in Colombia. Don't get me wrong. I love the rainforest. But we need to pay the same attention to our backyard as we do to all these incredible places around the world.
Well, and that obviously is what distinguished the Tennessee Aquarium was the freshwater aspect. And I mentioned to you I grew up in Memphis, but my wife grew up in Cleveland, Tennessee. So we would come visit my mother-in-law, and she would always take the girls to the Tennessee Aquarium, and I wouldn't go.
Oh,
and it wasn't
big
until
mistake. Big mistake.
Oh, huge mistake. It wasn't until about 1999 that I went. And I walked in and I said, what the hell's this doing in Chattanooga, Tennessee? I mean, it really was that.
It's incredible. It's an incredible resource, and a lot of people don't realize that we have the top aquarium in the country right here in Chattanooga, and that's something that we're incredibly proud of at the aquarium and are really striving to maintain.
Well, and we were talking earlier about the linchpin and what really spurred Chattanooga's growth, and so many people have mentioned the aquarium, but they also mentioned the fact that because when it was being conceived and the ideas were out there, that they didn't downsize it. If anything, Jack Lupton said, "Wait a second, if we're going to do this."
Jack Lupton didn't do things by half measures, did he? I
No.
mean, it was if we do it right. And yeah.
And it's paying dividends decades later.
It has. It really has.
Do you still teach some on the side?
I do when I can. So I've taught at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I have taught at University of the South, Sewanee. And I've been fortunate enough to teach a summer course for UVA before. But when I received my promotion into vice president over conservation science and education, that was a heavy enough workload that it was time to focus solely on that.
What was your role when you first came here?
I first came here as chief research scientist and director of the Tennessee Aquarium Research Institute, as we were known at the time. I laugh a little at that title because I was the chief research scientist because I was the only research scientist. It was a great title. It looked fantastic.
So what would you do all day in something like that?
When I first started, we were actually operating our conservation work out of a fish hatchery in North Georgia, in Cahata, Georgia. Beautiful, clean water. And so a lot of my focus at the time was on solely our reintroduction programs. And so we raise endangered species of several different types of fish for release back into the wild to help conserve those populations. So at the time, we were doing a lot of work with lake sturgeon. I started, again, building up a different network, more focused on fish conservation. And we have expanded and grown into a lot of different propagation programs for endangered fish, things like the laurel dace, which is something that we're really focused on right now, small fish that's only found in 2 counties in Tennessee, and unfortunately was devastated by the drought this summer. But we have really focused and leaned into getting a lot of expertise in how do we best raise a fish for release back into the wild, which is a different question than how do we best raise a fish and display it at the aquarium. So both are really important for the work we do at the Tennessee Aquarium, but there's a lot of care and thought that goes into parts of genetics and wild behaviors and diseases that we care about when it's released for conservation work.
Which 2 counties for the laurel dace?
Ray and Bledsoe.
How did you find out they were endangered?
Well, we have actually worked with that fish for a long time. So the laurel dace is this beautiful little red-bellied minnow. They're only a couple inches long. Most people would probably, they'd look at them and say, oh, that's pretty, and then they'd keep walking. We lean into those fish. So if it's a small fish, bring it on. We love them. And these fish were first found in 1976. They were given their formal scientific name in 2001. So remember when I mentioned we were still finding and describing fish across the Southeast? Here's one that was named in the past 25 years.
And laurel dace is its scientific name?
Its scientific name is Chrysomis sailori, but that's a bit much for most people, so we go with the common name of laurel dace.
Chrysomis sailori?
Chrysomis sailori.
Chrysomis sailori.
There you go. I tell people to pronounce it like it's a Harry Potter spell. If you do it with confidence, you'll just sound right.
Sounds like a character from Harry Potter, too.
Absolutely. You don't want to run into a Chrysomis sailori in Diagon Alley. Like, let me tell you, things go bad.
Well, if I do, I'll tell you about it.
Please do. So yeah, the laurel dace, because they live in streams where they're surrounded by mountain laurel. And so the laurel dace earned its name from the laurel that surrounds the streams.
Well, and if you'll talk a little bit about the difference between, because I'm curious of, you build the second building and it's go. the difference between bringing those animals in for display, what you've got to do that, and then the flip of that, finding things that you're reintroducing to nature, for lack of a better description.
Oh, no, it's a great question. So we have River Journey and Ocean Journey, which are bringing animals in for display. And those, I don't want to downplay the work that our husbandry department does, because it's a lot just to know how to go safely collect an animal, transport it to the aquarium safely, learn what it eats, learn what kind of temperatures it wants to swim in, provide it a natural habitat. And ideally, if you're doing these things correctly, the animal is then reproducing in human care because you've provided everything it's supposed to have. At the Conservation Institute, we are doing all of those same things, but we are also not trying to keep it throughout the span of its life, but to figure out, okay, how do we return it to the habitat where it should be? And also importantly, how do we protect the habitat and restore habitat in many cases so that we can reintroduce animals? Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, if an animal is lost from a particular river system, your first question is why? Mm-hmm. What happened? And if you think it was a one-time event, like, oh, maybe there was a horrific spill that occurred, but now it's gone, or maybe someone changed the habitat, but it's been put back and protected under an easement. Those are cases where we'd say, great, now we could return the animal that's been lost. But if no work has been done, we're not going to release an animal into a habitat we don't think can sustain it. But even if we are able to, we're working with very different numbers. So the Tennessee Aquarium has to display a huge variety of species from all around the world, but not too many of them. Whereas at the Conservation Institute, we're really leaning into 3 or 4 different species, but raising hundreds or thousands of individuals in order to release those individuals back. And if you're working in that type of quantity, you then have to pay attention to what's the genetic diversity like? Because if I raise 100 individuals, but they're all siblings, that's not quite as good for obvious reasons.
Right,
you know this. And so we have to pay attention to what is the genetic diversity? Do we have a population that we're rearing? What is the food source? If we're feeding them food and they're used to it, are they going to be able to find that food again in the wild when they're released? What are their behaviors like? Have they gotten too used to humans? And are they going to impair themselves when they get released when there's, a person in a fishing boat and they're like, oh, cool, that's food. No, it's not fish, not anymore.
See, you don't think, or at least I don't think about fish being used to humans.
Oh, they do.
Really?
They absolutely do. Yeah, anyone who works at the aquarium could tell you our fish know when a blue shirt walks by.
Really?
And our fish know when a visitor walks by. They know which one is likely to feed them, and it's the blue shirts. So they absolutely can get accustomed and acclimated to humans.
And this is kind of a dumb guy question. And it has. I
love those. Remember, those are my favorites.
I could be one of your 7-year-old students, trust me, because that's where my way my brain works. The animals on display. How do you get them? And what I mean by that is, the husbandry department has them, but how do they get there? How do you got to go out and buy them? How do they ship them?
It's the answer could take another hour because it's different for every single species. For many of them, we are collecting directly from the wild. So a lot of these stream fish, we will go out with what are called seine nets, and we will seine up the fish. For others, we'll go on a little bit longer expeditions. Some of them, yes, they are purchased from people who have permits, and it is procured for us in a way that is legal and safe for the animal. A lot of times, though, our whole industry is shifting gears to what we call sustainability of collections, which means how are we able to spawn them in human care and make sure that they are, like I said, healthy enough, they have the best nutrition, and that they're able to sustain their population so we don't have to go out and collect individuals from the wild. And so a lot of the work that we do at the aquarium and at the Conservation Institute is trying to provide our animals with the right conditions that they do want to spawn in our care, and they are a self-sustaining population.
I got a couple more questions for you.
Absolutely.
Then we'll wrap these things up. So with the ones that you're trying to save, reintroduce to the population, how do you reintroduce? You don't go out with a pail and just pour them into the river.
Sometimes we do.
Really?
Yeah. It depends on the species again. We have released sturgeon, and we actually use fish hauling trucks from the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. So the same way they would stock trout, they will bring those big trucks full of just giant tanks of water, and we will load our sturgeon into those tanks. We will bring them to the river somewhere. We use the kayak ramp at Coolidge Park quite a bit. We will load up sturgeon into pails of water. We use clear pails so that kids and the public who's helping us can actually see the sturgeon that they are releasing. And we will gently pour the fish in. The gentle is the key word for all of this. Our trout, when we release Southern Appalachian brook trout, we will actually bag them up, much like a goldfish at a fair. We put them into bags. I know, you laugh, but it's a comment that we make over and over. They're in these bags full of oxygen. We will hike up mountain streams. We will release a couple of fish in each of the pools right below little tiny waterfalls so that we're dispersing the trout throughout the stream and they're not all clumped on top of each other. I've done others where we have canoed fish up and down a river, releasing them into different spots so they don't have to migrate themselves.
Are you focusing on species that are indigenous to this area and releasing them here, or are you working on anything that you've got to go take them to west of the Mississippi?
We are absolutely focused just on this river. So all of the conservation work is within about a 4 to 5 hour drive of Chattanooga. There is plenty in just this region to keep us busy without ever looking elsewhere. And we really firmly believe in local conservation efforts. We think that we are here, we understand our community, we understand what our community is hoping for from our rivers and streams, and we're trying to respond to those wishes of the community, but also where our expertise is located, and that's completely with southeastern aquatic life.
What would you tell that 10-year-old who's out there, and I don't think we got a lot of 10-year-old listeners, so maybe they're in the car with their parents, but that kid who's got the interest that they should start doing, and maybe 10's a little young, but I mean, if they got the bug, so to speak.
I've seen 10-year-olds with the bugs. We've met a 10-year-old at the aquarium who knew more scientific names, I think, than one of our PhD scientists. So I would say just at that age, a lot of the focus is on reading everything you absolutely can. There is so much information out there these days, which is fantastic. I would tell the 10-year-old, pester your parents, because if you keep it up long enough, they will eventually send you to the Caribbean to get rid of you for a month. So
can you give any pointers on how to get a Cayman vacation out of this?
I think annoying is really repetitive questions. They get you a long way with parents.
Annoying's underrated.
It really is. It really is. My mom paid a lot of money to just not deal with me for a month. So that's my comment.
You must have been really annoying. In a good way.
The best possible.
Way. Well, before I get to my last question, I do want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible. And it's thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Dr. George.
I have as well.
And I got one last question for you.
Okay.
What would you tell that 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
I mean, fish.
It was the theme.
How could I answer otherwise?
Yeah.
She knew it all. I'd tell her to stop worrying.
Stop worrying?
Yeah.
From what standpoint?
It's going to work out the way it's going to work out. And you are, every 25-year-old out there is equipped with what they need to solve whatever problems life throws at them.
And, that's such an important point, and a couple of people have mentioned that before. It's going to work out.
It's going to work out.
Just because a door closes doesn't mean that
there's not several others that are going to open soon behind them.
It presents a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. I think confidence is really what most 25-year-olds need. They already have it. They just need to use it.
Just got to discover it and have it come to the top. That's great advice. I really appreciate you coming in. It's good to see you. And I've always enjoyed the aquarium, and both my daughters, thank you for all the hard work.
Well, thanks to all of your family for your support over the years and the support today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.